Welcome to Policy Chats, the official podcast of the UC Riverside School of Public Policy. I'm your host, Dori Pham. Join me and my fellow public policy classmates as we explore potential policy solutions for today's most pressing societal challenges. Thank you so much for joining us today, Professor Gaudette. We're excited to have you on the Policy Chats podcast. You are a assistant professor at the UCR School of Public Policy, and your research focuses on vote behavior, decision making, in nonpartisan local elections, and like interest in group endorsements, especially police unions. Um, and so your work also bridge local policies and national polarization, showing how debates over policing and public safety increasingly influence city elections. Um, as local governments play a central role in today's political landscape, we're looking forward to hearing your insights on polarization in cities, politics, and how voters interpret endorsements and what it means for the future of nonpartisan local democracy. So, kind of to start off, your research looks at how like voters make decisions in nonpartisan local elections, where information is often limited. What drew you to studying, police unions endorsements in uh, mayoral races specifically, and why do you think city politics is such an important place to study polarization today?
Well, first off, thank you guys for having me. I'm really excited to be here. This was a project that I actually started on before I even began my PhD program. In the summer of 2020, I saw this tweet from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, where she said, "I'll just say it, politicians are afraid of the power of the police." And I had this thought. I was like, well, that's interesting. And I wonder why. And I would say a lot of my research is motivated by me just like looking at something in politics or in policy and being like, I wonder why. And part of the reason I was a corporate lawyer for 7 years, part of the reason I left that was I paid off my student loans. So I didn't have to do it anymore. But also, so much of my free time I spent reading about politics and policy and thinking, I wonder why. So I saw this tweet from Representative Ocasio-Cortez, and I was like, this is interesting. I wonder why, but also I wonder if it's still true, essentially. Like, I wondered if I was seeing all these signs of polarization. I live in Orange County, and it's a really cool place to live if you're interested in politics and local politics because it's very purple. So you get to see like a mix. You get to see like I have neighbors who are very strong Republicans. I have neighbors who are very strong Democrats. You get to see that mix, which is really nice as somebody who studies this. And so, I would see a thin blue line flag on a car or a Blue Lives Matter bumper sticker. And then I would see, Black Lives Matter and, calls for policing reform. And I wondered if in our like hyper-polarized world, if it was possible that the meaning of a police endorsement had changed, basically. And if the power of police unions was maybe partially based on some politicians not realizing that that endorsement had possibly changed, like the signal it was sending. Because traditionally, the way elected officials would think about a police union endorsement is that, hey, this shows that I care about public safety. Mm-hmm. This shows that I am like the best candidate to keep crime low, right? And that's not really, at times that has been a partisan issue in our nation's history. So actually in the 60s, there was, there was movements toward certain police reform ideas. And then there was also a backlash that was like, support your local police, SYLP. Very similar kind of dynamics, right? And so that had died down a bit, and I wondered if this was just like a new period of the same thing. and therefore if this endorsement could actually be conveying like ideological or partisan signals to voters. And so I wanted to understand that, but I didn't have the tools yet because I was about to start a PhD program, but I didn't know what to do. So I just started saying, okay, I'm just going to start collecting endorsements. And I don't know what I'm going to do with this data, but I'm going to collect it. And I had just had my daughter. She was born March 20th, 2020. Very exciting time to have a newborn. And so this was also kind of my like, oh, I get to use my brain again thing. It was that summer I started collecting these endorsements before I started the program. And then in the fall of 2020, all online because of COVID, I started my PhD program. And in one of the classes, we learned about conjoint survey experiments. And a conjoint survey experiment is basically, you show like profiles to people, you show 2 profiles, you're like, who would you rather vote for? And there's different things and they're totally randomized. And essentially that just like, when you have it fully randomized like that, you can see the causal effect. And what that means is you can see what getting an endorsement from a police union versus getting an endorsement from a firefighters union, like what effect that has on people and how that differs by like the demographic profile reported by the person on the survey. So I learned about that and I put that together. And then I also had the endorsements. And essentially I like put it together. I'm a big fan of like combining studies. So like testing something in that online survey like lab essentially environment, but then also seeing if it bears out in the real world. And what my intuition had been and what I found was that because of how there'd been a lot of polarization around policing, people, when they saw that police union endorsement, they assumed it meant that the candidate was more conservative. And the truth is that's not necessarily the case because sometimes it's just the candidate. Sometimes it's like a more pro-union candidate who's going to be more willing to have big budgets or something for public services. And that's often the Democrat, actually. But so in my data, it's not that Democrats were like only endorsed 10% of the time. They're endorsed more than half of the time in these bigger cities by police unions. But people see the endorsement and they think that it is a sign of a candidate being more conservative.
So that kind of fits into how you talk about the police union endorsements kind of functioning as like an information queue.
Exactly, yeah. So an information queue is basically just something that people latch onto. An information shortcut is another way to put it. Because first of all, in federal elections, parties on the ballot. And that is the information shortcut of all information shortcuts. What it means is you see that party. And 50 years ago, the parties weren't that different. Or I guess I should say 70 years ago. I'm thinking 1950s. I'm thinking I'm younger than I am. So 70 years ago, there was actually the American Political Science Association put out this big report saying the parties need to be more different because people don't know what they're voting for. They need to have platforms that are distinct so that there's a message sent when you vote for one of them. Obviously, that's not the issue anymore. And so because of that, the difference between the parties, you can kind of guess, and the fact that most members of the party hold the same position on most issues now. And so because of that, like if I see Democrat or Republican on the ballot, I kind of know like 90% chance what I'm getting. And so I don't have to know about their policy positions. I can just see the party line. But like 80% of our local elections, municipal elections, mayor, city council, no party on the ballot. And unfortunately, thousands of local newspapers have also gone out of business over the past couple of decades. And so we have this combination of local elections where we don't have party on the ballot. So we don't have that like great information shortcut of knowing what people likely stand for. And we don't have other information sources because so many places don't have a local newspaper anymore. And what that means is that people are oftentimes kind of adrift when you're trying to figure out who to vote for. So some states and counties put out voter guides with their candidate statements. And I actually am working on a new project where I'm going to test how voter guides might move vote choice. using, once again, both a conjoint survey experiment and actual data, using actual voter guides. But a lot of times, if you look at a voter guide, there's not a lot of information in there. Everyone's like, I want to serve my community, and I care about public safety, and I care about, I love where we live, and I'm going to ensure that things grow, that businesses thrive, and like kids are happy. Like it's all just, very positive stuff, obviously. And there's not a lot of information in there. But one thing that is in there is endorsements. A lot of times people say, oh, I've been endorsed by XYZ. And sometimes it's the local party. So once again, okay, great. I've got my party queue. I know who I'm going to vote for. But a lot of times there is no party on there. And so now instead what you have are maybe you have a police union endorsement. Maybe you have a teachers union endorsement. And my work also shows that a teachers union endorsement also generates a polarized response. It's just the inverse of the police union response, where voters see the teachers union endorsement and they assume it's a more liberal candidate, which then liberal voters are more likely to vote for and conservative voters are less likely to vote for. Oh, and sorry, and I should clarify, this is in the mayor, the city council context, because other work by other scholars has shown that if you have a police union endorsement in a district attorney race or a sheriff race, it's much less polarizing. People are more likely from all parties to vote for them. And similarly, teachers union endorsements are also like a positive for both parties, though less so for Republicans, but they're positive for both parties in school board elections. And that's because those are areas of expertise for these two different groups. But so my research is looking in the city council, county supervisor, mayor, like these things where there's no reason they have special expertise in those areas. So their endorsement is seen more as this like ideological cue, this information shortcut about the positions likely that the candidate has.
Yeah, thank you so much. And as a follow-up, do you think there is like a reason behind like the assumption? Because like those assumptions must have come from somewhere or like at some point throughout like the history.
Yeah, so the polarization, it doesn't exist if you look at the early 2010s. It really starts in the middle of the decade, and what I put as the crystallizing point. So this starts becoming a national conversation as you have the rise of Black Lives Matter as a social advocacy group pushing for policing reform. You have, Ferguson protests. There are a lot of high-profile shootings of unarmed Black men by police that are captured on smartphone and are then, really galvanizing for certain groups. And so you start seeing the parties taking positions around this. Usually a lot of the politicians will say, this one instance is terrible. But you start seeing more of this polarization. And I think it's really crystallized, and I kind of put that hinge point at 2016. When in 2016, it's always funny when I bring this up, and people have like memory hold this. But in 2016, at the Democratic National Convention, Hillary Clinton had the Mothers of the Movement on stage, and those were mothers who had lost their sons to gun violence, but it was almost entirely shootings by police. And they were there to talk about, the need for policing reform. And then on the Republican National Convention stage, there was, I'm blanking on his name. He was from the Midwest, but he was a sheriff or former sheriff. And, he came on stage as a Blue Lives Matter. And it was an emphasis on law and order, an emphasis on being pro-policing. And so those two, I think, are a really great contrast of how the parties took a side of this debate in 2016. It was then a national issue. And then obviously in 2020, we have the murder of George Floyd, and then some of the biggest protests nationwide we've ever seen. It only becomes more national. But 2016 is really that hinge where the idea of police union politics shifted from being an indicator of public safety bona fides to people starting to see it through this polarized lens. And you can see that if you look at Gallup polling. Liberal confidence in police starts going down right around that same point, while conservative trust in police stays high and actually goes a bit higher at that point.
Got it. So you kind of highlighted 2016 as being like that marker of like the polarization starting to take effect at the national level. Do you have any like insights as to how that's bleeding into the local level and how that's bleeding into local politics, especially for, as you said, positions where it's not necessarily driven by like ideology or political ideology?
Yeah, and so the debate about policing, what's really interesting with local politics is that local politics, for a long time, they were considered non-ideological, nonpartisan, because party's not in the ballot, again, in like 80% of elections, but also just the fact that a lot of issues didn't seem to break down on these national partisan lines. And over the past decade, that has changed, the past 10, 15 years. And so as that has changed, more and more issues become nationalized. And as that happens, then and parties take positions, then people, in accordance with like their partisan alignment, they will take positions as well, and they will then view those local policy issues through that national partisan lens. Another good example of this is that, like with teachers' unions, if you look again at Gallup polling, trust in public schools as kind of a proxy for like trust in teachers/teachers unions, because public school teachers are like private school teachers are not usually unionized. And so right around 2020, 2021, opening schools, what you teach in schools, those are local issues, but they become these national polarizing debates. And as that happens, once again, it's conservative trust dropping. I will say the trust by both parties was already lower than in police, but the trust in public schools drops significantly, while liberal trust stays high. And the polarization emerges there. And instead of it being 2016, it's when this nationalization of this local issue happens. And so there were a lot of scholars who were basically like, local politics is just different. It's not partisan because party's not on the ballot. But because we're becoming so polarized, and also I think people are looking for potential local issues that they can really turn into a national partisan debate. It's a great example of how the local can become national.
Yeah, thank you so much. So you mentioned earlier, liberals are less likely and conservatives are more likely to support police union endorsed candidates. What does this tell us about when ideology matters in local politics, and how national debates over policing reshape voter decision in making like local and city elections?
I don't actually think that people are necessarily like policing is their main issue, and that's why they're changing their vote potentially. I think it's more just an indicator of politics, and people are looking for indicators of politics because they don't have a lot to go on. So again, if I get a voter guide and both of the candidates are basically the same, but I really believe in back the blue and I really, I care about police, then I would vote for the police union endorsed candidate. But even more so, it might not be that I'm like, oh, I care so much about policing reform. That's the main thing I vote on. It's more just that I'm like, well, I'm sympathetic with them. I think that they tend to be the national. One other thing in 2016, the National Police Union endorsed Trump, so maybe I'm aware of that, and so I'm just like, I don't really know how to vote. I gave this example earlier for something, but I not in this podcast, but in a different setting, like I have to vote on water commissioner in my local elections. I don't know how to vote for water commissioner. I don't know what, I'm not even, I study local politics and I'm not even fully aware of what a water commissioner does. It has to do with water, I'm sure. And so, but if one of the water commissioners had an endorsement from one of these groups, I could kind of guess probably, clearly that would be a symbol to me that they had some kind of an ideological leaning. And the reason that I mentioned it's different in if you're running for a law enforcement position, or if you're running for the school board, those are, again, areas of expertise. But if one of these unions that I think is aligned with this national issue is making an endorsement outside their area of expertise, I'm going to guess that there's some kind of a something political going on. There's some kind of ideological valence to the race, and I'm going to attach it to the candidate getting that endorsement. And it's not just for police unions. Teachers unions are perceived as being liberal, so like people respond to those in the same way. I will say, my research shows chambers of commerce people all respond negatively to, like liberals, conservatives, independents. Everyone I think sees it as like big business or something like that. They're like, no, I'm not.
Wow, that's very interesting how, these different unions serve as indicators for people on choosing their votes. Um, so as a follow-up, do you think that like local politicians, like county supervisors, mayors, council members, they they run their campaign on like choosing targeted unions to have them endorse them?
Oh, they do for sure. That's absolutely something they do. Yeah. It's not even something my research. I also engage in local politics because again, I find it really interesting to understand kind of what's happening under the hood from the perspective of local elected officials. I try to talk to them, and they are like, oh, I got to get that endorsement. And the thing is, you can say, oh, well, my survey data shows, but they're going to say, no, I know my constituents. So there's sort of an interesting thing there, too, where you can say, oh, well, if you have, X percentage who are, registered Democrats, then you don't need to worry about the police union endorsement. They will disagree with you strongly. And vice versa, if you were like, oh, really, it's a Republican area, so you don't need the teachers union endorsement or something like that, and it was a Democrat, they would probably disagree. Or maybe the Republican would disagree because they're like, no, that's kind of that signal I want, that I'm on their side. So there is definitely, as much as I have real world election data that shows that if you're endorsed by a police union and you're in a very liberal area, you have a lower vote share if you're an incumbent. But that doesn't mean that like people saw that endorsement and therefore they didn't vote for them. It could also just mean the police union voted for the more conservative candidate in that race. Like it was 2 Democrats and they just voted for the more conservative Democrat, so they did a little worse. It could be that as well. And people are responding to that. So basically, like in the real world, these endorsements are seen as very important by a lot of elected officials. And it's not like totally clear that they're always right, but especially for somebody who keeps getting elected, who's to say they're wrong?
I see. And so do you think these choosing targeted endorsements varies by like council member to council members? Because, each council is within the city. And so they run for like different wards. And so like, let's say Riverside Ward 1, for example, the council member that's running, he or she will like choose a targeted endorsement that he or she wants to get. So do you think that like, that varies on like a small scale like that, or like on like a bigger scale, or like a county supervisor, like where they oversee like a bigger or larger amount of area?
It's a good question. I'm not sure how much it varies because the other thing is that like county supervisors, they might manage a larger area, but like turnout for those elections, people sometimes know even less because they manage a bigger area, so it's harder to have a personal relationship with your county supervisor, and versus like a member of the city council. And then some city councils also don't have districts. There are some that are just at large. So it's hard to know for sure who would be more. I think though, like again, and the other thing is actually party is more likely to be on the ballot for county races than for municipal. But when party's not on the ballot, it can be a really important signal.
Very cool. So as you're talking about these different union endorsements and how they impact local politics, one of the unions that you looked at was firefighters, like firefighter unions, as kind of like a placebo test.
Yes.
I was curious about what the results for those showed and like how that impacted your argument or your stance on.
Yeah, so firefighters unions are a placebo test, as you said, because it's another public safety union. And so the reason that's a placebo test, what it means basically is it's a way to check if you're right.
Yeah.
Because it's like, okay, well, there's no polarization
Yeah.
happening about firefighters. Everybody loves firefighters.
Exactly.
So because it's a public safety union, like if there is something that has to do with public safety unions or public employees unions in that context, something like that, then you would expect to see the same polarization happening toward them. Or you would expect that, again, I was looking at mayoral incumbents running for re-election and seeing their vote share results, and there's no impact. So I don't see impact in the real world. And in the survey experiment, not only do I not see like a polarized impact, but everybody loves firefighters. Even in the experiment, everyone's like, of course I'll vote for the firefighter candidate. And I will say, when I've chatted with local officials, one thing they're like, you can't piss off the firefighters. They're very important. And they have a lot of money. Firefighters, so that is, I also separately, I have data on local election contributions that I've like classified by interest group type, who's giving the money. And firefighters unions have a lot of money. They both, I think they're very concerted about raising the money. The other thing is that we have a lot fewer fires than we used to, like 80 years ago. And so I think firefighters unions had to be really savvy political actors to ensure that their members still have a role to play. So that's why, like they do EMS, they do emergency medical services for cities. And they've been like very intelligent political actors at like carving out additional work for them to do for the city in order to protect their members. Because otherwise, like, again, if you don't have as many fires, there can be a push like, oh, maybe we don't need as many firefighters. And though in their defense, once the fire happens, you want to have the firefighters, right? So as we in California very well know. So I think they do a lot of contributing. I did a couple interviews as background with police union executives, and it was really funny how frustrated they were by firefighters unions, because the police guys, they were like, we can't just like show up and knock at somebody's door. You think a family member has died if that happens, right? So you're like, but if a firefighter, is like, if they're canvassing for a candidate, you're like, oh, the firefighters, yeah. And one police officer, funniest quote, he was like, firefighter just has to take his hat off in an intersection and people fill it with money. So again, so police unions, like their executives, like these are all political actors. Like they're looking out for their members, but they have to navigate the political process because the people who are elected, they make their budget. So, in the corporate world, you can't like impact, you can't like donate money or like knock on doors to try to impact who your boss is. But firefighters and police officers and other public employees, teachers, through their unions, they all can do that. And it's a really interesting aspect of our local politics.
So moving to the big picture, thinking about like broader implications, how should candidates in liberal cities think about seeking or signaling police unions endorsements today? And what should voters take away from interpreting these endorsements in local elections?
I think it's really tough to know the dynamics overall. I think, so I ran my survey in January 2022. And, in that year, obviously, with COVID, we saw murder rates spike. And so, like, the effects, I think, would have been even more pronounced if I'd run my survey in 2020. And I think, there's still this polarization. People still have the perception that police unions are conservative and teachers unions are liberal. But at the same time, I do think elected officials, if you need to work with a group, it's important that you're able to have that conversation with them. And so you don't want to be in a position where the group is going to be antagonistic to you as you're trying to do your job, basically. And so I think we see this, or we have seen this over the past 5 years with certain elected officials, especially in big cities. And so I actually wouldn't give like a prescription because I think it really depends. So there are some big city groups that are going to be willing to work with you even on a reform agenda, especially if you're like, hey, there's somebody else who's even more extreme, so really I'm your best option. And I was able to chat actually with an LA city council member who essentially said that basically they were like, I'm on good terms with the police, even though I have reform items I've pushed for, because I'm like, hey, the other person who would replace me is going to be a lot more tough on these issues. And as I mentioned, again, like these are political actors, so they can understand that. So I think it's just, it really varies by context. And so like what my paper finds is these general trends and general findings. But it's averages. And so in some places, you're going to have a different response than others. And it's also going to depend on the police union. I'm about to present work looking at, in a couple weeks, looking at where police unions contribute and how they change. And what I find is that they also, as things get polarized, they shift how they're spending money. So it's not just that like, oh, nationalization happened and so people started voting a certain way and police unions didn't change. They also shifted. They started spending a lot more money in city elections because they were under, threat, essentially. Their policy priorities were under threat. And one reason like police reform is such a potent issue is that budgets are finite. Like you can only spend so much. And so you can only negotiate so many raises for your members. And so what you start doing is negotiating more job protections and more benefits that aren't on the balance sheet. And so that's why like reform measures for multiple different kinds of these political actors. So like, for teachers, for police, for multiple groups, oftentimes like any kinds of changes to their work environment, like that's where they can push, where there's not a dollar item there, so they can push without changing the budget. And so when there's a reform measure, they're going to see that as like a direct threat to their members, and they're going to respond accordingly. And so that's in some new research that I'm gearing up for presenting and then ultimately submitting to journals. Like that's what I find in terms of their contributions. And I find that across the states I have are Washington State, Massachusetts, blue states, but then I'm also finding the trend in Iowa and Virginia. So redder and then purple-ish states.
Very cool. Looking forward, just generally speaking, what do you think this kind of polarization at the local levels regarding unions means for the future of nonpartisan local democracy?
So I have a controversial opinion here. I don't think local elections should be nonpartisan, actually. Spicy. Because most of the time, the people are members of a party, and the parties endorse them. And so, like, parties out there for those who are really engaged. So let's make sure people who maybe have small, like, I have a party affiliation, but I don't go to the meetings or get, like, I'm not on their mailing list. Maybe I'm not registered, but I feel closer to one party. Like, let people know that. And I have some other work. So there were the move to nonpartisan elections. The whole idea behind having nonpartisan elections was, that we shouldn't be thinking about big party politics at the local level. But like, sorry guys, clearly local politics is nationalized. One of the few areas where it's not nationalized probably is housing. There it is much more, do you own a home or do you not? Yeah. I can say, based on my experience, advocating for more housing. And so it's also, and which is correlated with age. But most issues, and the funny thing is, so most of the issues like that local politics is supposed to focus on, they are still nonpartisan, right? Like in the town I live in, unfortunately, like there were 3 DUI deaths last year. It's a town of 30,000. Like that's crazy. And that's not partisan. That's street safety. But all like the members of the city council, they all have a party affiliation. One is an independent, but is perceived as having a party affiliation despite being an independent. So like when I get the ballot this fall, I know who's on the party because I'm involved in local politics. A lot of people are going to get that and they're not going to know. And would it change their vote? Not necessarily, but it's just information. And, we don't have a newspaper that's like conducting in-depth research, right? And so it's just really important to have, I'm a big fan of like transparency, getting more information out there. And so I think that parties should, if not being on the ballot, at least be in like voter guides or something like that, just like a party affiliation. And another reason is that like all the studies have found there really are no benefits to nonpartisan elections, that like they don't result in better outcomes than partisan elections at the local level. And I have some other, a working paper with a PhD colleague of mine from the program who's at MIT now. And we found, so basically we thought, well, okay, there've been lots of studies showing that nonpartisan elections don't really do much. That's great. But maybe people are less polarized in those towns. Maybe if you have nonpartisan elections, you're less polarized. No, they're equally polarized. So they're just as polarized towards their neighbors. And we actually found like some possible evidence and we don't really know, like it was too small a sample for us to say with certainty, but we found some suggestive evidence that actually having party on the ballot, if you have like really competent local leaders, basically we found like small cities, small towns, it seemed like people might be less polarized if party was on the ballot. And our theory was that if you have an example of the party that's not yours and they're doing a good job at that local level, and maybe they're not talking about these national issues, well, maybe then you're actually a little less polarized because you're like, oh, I hate the national, whatever. I hate the president, but my local city council member, they're the same party, and actually they do a decent job. So maybe not all Democrats are bad. Maybe not all Republicans are bad. So I would put party on the ballot on local elections. Hot take.
Yeah, thank you so much. So you mentioned that you are doing a new research that you're gonna propose in the next few weeks. Can you tell us a bit more about the reason why you wanted to continue your research on polarization and why that research came up?
Yeah, well, there are two reasons. So one is I'm still interested in understanding like how these different dynamics work. So my paper was looking more at the voter element of it, like how do voters respond. But I'm really interested in the interest groups themselves, the organized interests, and seeing how they are acting. And then the second reason is in academia, you are supposed to kind of have an area of expertise. So it makes sense for me to also continue doing it for that reason. But again, like the I wonder why question, where I was like, well, I wonder why we see this shift. Or I wonder if, and I wonder why. But the larger data set I'm doing this work from is something I've been working on for several years. And that was, I wanted to understand, I was like, well, who's giving? And when I went into it, most states don't have like comprehensive local donation data. So in most states, you don't really know who's giving in local elections. And then several states, I think it's 5 states, have no cap whatsoever on the amount you can give in a local election. Virginia and Iowa are 2 of them. Which is funny because the thing is, what's really interesting about this is there's no cap, right? So you could theoretically go into some little election and just drop $100,000 and overwhelm it, but people don't really. Like, there's a couple outliers, but if anything, you would say, like, why is there not more money? Like, about 80% of the money given in local races comes just from individuals. It's not coming from like big corporate interests or unions dominating it, which is really interesting. And I think it goes, again, more to that, like that relationship element I had mentioned, that like getting an endorsement signifies you're going to be able to work with them. And like a lot of the political power of these groups comes more from that than that they're just like flooding the zone with money.
I see. And so, as a follow-up, do you we always ask our guests this? So if you had a magical wand, and you are able to fix any problems in the world, what would it be and how would you fix it?
Well, I would say like global poverty first, but that's not in my wheelhouse. Let's see. If I could fix any problem, well, I'll like contain myself to the United States, and local politics. I mean, I think I would. I think I would create some kind of. I think I would convince Jeff Bezos to give no strings attached giant grants to start a bunch of newspapers, since he's not funding the Washington Post to the same degree as he previously was, and he has a lot of money. I think local news is just such an integral part of. I think you can't have democratic functioning if you don't know what's happening, and the more local you get, the easier it is to engage in like some kind of malfeasance, some kind of bad behavior without being caught. And I mean, we have U.S. senators with gold bars in their jackets. In the case of former New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez. So like the corruption, there is potential for corruption at all levels, and it's a lot easier to get away with at the local level. A county supervisor was just sent in Orange County, was just sentenced to jail for directing a bunch of money to, I think it was his daughter's charity or something like that, but it was all fake, and she was building or buying houses. There were like millions of dollars of county funds implicated in this. And so that got caught, in part because it's a large county. Orange County is like 5 or 6 million people. There is the Orange County Register. There is some, news. There's enough institutional oversight. But the more local you get, the easier it is to kind of get away with things. And just having those local newspapers is really, and local investigative journalists is really important. So often this kind of stuff is figured out by journalists. And the issue is that a lot of news media these days is focused on, again, to go to like the consequences of the polarization. A lot of news media is focused on national politics because that's what people click on and that's how you survive. And so there isn't the incentive there. And so that's why you really need to have that nonprofit funded news that can potentially be digging into what's happening at the local level. And it's not that big companies are just coming in and getting whatever they want necessarily. It's more just that there are a lot of avenues for non-responsiveness. And, democracy not functioning the way it should because people just don't really know what's going on. And most of the news they get is going to be through social media where, people can get the facts wrong. Things can go viral very easily. And another project, so most of my work focuses on local politics. I also, though, am part of a research team where we study how to increase people's trust in elections. And we found previously, if you just show a video that explains how elections are kept secure, people are like, oh, I didn't know that. I guess, and they actually have more trust in elections. Like, I didn't actually know a lot of the ways our elections are kept secure before I started this work. And so recently we had a grant, and I had really wanted to study. I had a theory that TikTok-style vertical video was just very persuasive to people. There's something about that face-to-face kind of, it feels like you're face-to-face. It feels like they're just talking to you. They're not lying to you, right? And so I wanted to test this. And so we did this over the break, and this paper is about to be submitted to a journal. But we just got the results back a couple weeks ago, and basically I just recorded a video sitting in my car, like with my phone like propped up, just saying, it was like a very casual style video where I said, I'm just hopping on because I was talking to a friend and I realized a lot of people don't know that voting machines are not connected to the internet. So there's no way you can hack them. And both parties actually get to like watch the vote count. So there's really not a lot of opportunity for elections to be stolen. It was that kind of like very casual vibe. I added the subtitles, right? I couldn't do the cuts because I couldn't watch myself talk that much. But, it was very TikTok style. And I didn't say I was a professor. I didn't say I had any reason to know this. I just gave the information. And so on a sample of over 8,000 people, and it was 2,000 per watched each video. And then it was a State Farm ad was our control. And so how much you said you trusted elections after watching the State Farm video compared to before, that's your baseline. It's not going to change because it's just a State Farm ad, right? And it was with Caitlin Clark. So maybe if like Caitlin Clark makes you more trusting, if we get it right, but that's like you use a good control. So the other two videos were then from actual election offices. So they came from, one was from a county in Wisconsin, and it was a humorous video. So it was like a Darth Vader comes in. He's like, I'm Chad Vader. And these and he's like, I'm taking over this polling station. I'm going to rig the election. And the polling workers are like, actually, you can't do that because, the machines are not connected to the internet and both parties are going to So it had the same information. And it probably cost, at least $10,000. It's good production value. And then we have this third video that was from the Maricopa County that was very basic. And again, just was like, this is how elections are kept secure, same information. And what's crazy is the people who watched the video, which is just me sitting in my car talking to the camera, their increase in trust was equal to people who watched that highly produced Vader video, and only a little bit less than the Arizona video, where they were like, this is like official information from the elections board. And so when I say misinformation, this is another line of work, but I think at least if you have other sources of media where you can go and like verify the information, right? You can go to those. If it's some kind of local issue, if something's spreading online about a local issue, well, if there's no source of news, then how would you even verify if that was true or not? I will also say we had an option. So we tested people then to see if they remembered what they had learned from the video. And people remembered the most from the TikTok video, but they were the least likely to click on a link that was like, do you want to learn more, which is a way to verify. They were the least likely to click on that. So they were like, I'm not going to verify the information and also remembering it. So it does suggest that, just like the need for potentially like getting news media to be able to, answer this kind of information. Though who knows if people will trust it, but at least have that option.
Yeah. Wow. What a fun way to conduct experiment.
Normally, professors are not recording videos of themselves as studies. This was like a very, but we had to keep the funding. We had to like get it out within a week. So I was like, I will do it.
Very fun. Very fun. And also very, informative on how like people tend to like trust, TikTok style videos more than like, going to verify the information themselves.
Well, I just want to clarify. It's not that they trust it more than, but it was equal to, which I will just say some other members of the team were a little more skeptical that might be the case. And the other thing is when we looked at young people, they did trust the TikTok video more than the other ones. So,
wow, that's very interesting, and you can clearly see how like local politicians are like posting these type of videos on their social media accounts more and more every single day.
Yes.
And now like people know and understand how it affects and impacts voters and their constituents. So as a follow-up on this, you mentioned that sorry, I'm blank. You mentioned that police unions are endorsing candidates that are more that protect the police union more, and so do you think this is true in every single union across like all like workers unions, teachers unions? Do you think that's true in regards that they endorse the candidates that have a good impact on them like the most?
So it's an interesting question, and it really I think that unions are kind of a special case. Or I guess I should say police unions are a special case because in my contributions data, like I think it's 85% of the time, to the extent party is available in the data, 85% of the time unions are giving to a Democrat. Like that's just who they donate to. And when I did an interview with a police union executive, he said, he was like, my guys do not lean Democratic, but we'll endorse them, like if we convince them it's better for them. But it's getting harder because things are getting more polarized. But then another thing he said was that he said, I am more conservative personally, but just a couple years ago, Republicans were trying to pull back our benefits and cut our pay. And he said, they love us now in 2022, right? He's like, they love us now, but just a few years ago, they were trying to cut our pay back. So even with police unions, the majority of the time, they still are giving actually to Democrats, especially because, if you're looking at bigger cities are more Democratic. So the candidates are more likely to be Democrats. So if you want to curry favor or if you want to just, signal you're on their good side, like you're more likely to be giving to a Democrat. But it's significantly lower for police unions than it is for every other union. Firefighters unions are probably the closest, but even then they are still in the 70% Democrat giving range. And a lot of it's just like the makeup of these different cities, at least again, and this data is for the 5 states I have. Washington, California, not California, Washington, Massachusetts, Virginia, South Carolina, Iowa. And actually unions really don't exist in South Carolina. It's the least unionized state in the union in America, basically. I'm not, so whether they give to the person who is, or the party that's they're looking out for their interests, I mean, to a certain extent, they don't have a ton of options, I think, right? Just because if you are in a mid-sized to large city in most of the country, it's probably pretty Democratic. And by mid-size, I mean 200,000 plus. I think I want to say that Fort Worth, Dallas, maybe it's Dallas, is the last big city that still has a Republican mayor. Every other big city in the country basically has a Democratic mayor.
Wow, that's interesting. And so I think that is a great way to end our podcast right here. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast and sharing your research and also your upcoming research. It was really insightful and interesting to find out more on police unions, on local government. And so thank you so much for your time, and we're honored to have you on the Policy Chats podcast. Thank you for listening to Policy Chats, the official podcast of the UC Riverside School of Public Policy. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow us on Instagram at UCR_SPP. To learn more about our program and upcoming episodes, visit spp.ucr.edu. For the video version of this episode, check out our YouTube channel at UCR School of Public Policy. Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.